All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's class. This is the task that I asked people to do. So the essence of the task is dockerizing a full stack application. You know, Dockerizing a full stack application. This application enables users to create a list of countries that they like to visit, providing basic information about each country. The project is structured to mimic a real-life production environment, employing best practice in software development. This and continuous integration, that one we'll discuss later. But what we're going to do now is basically deployment and containerized deployment. So that's what we're going to do right now. But we're going to only do the front end of the application. So the rest, for those for this class, the rest of you will now do the back end and the database. You still do the front end though, but you still have a bit more expo. You get or you now do the back end and the front and the database. Connect everything. Make sure if possible, sir, for bonus mark, you can do like a Loom video. A Loom video to show how everything works. How if you put a country to stay and if you refresh. So I want to ask while you are doing the database, ensure that you employ volumes as well, so that if the container goes down, your data is still secured. Don't ensure that you put volumes on that database. I think it's part of the tax requirement because I'm going to check. So yeah, this is the setup back end. This is the manual setup. So we are doing it in terms of this is also this file we use for CI/CD as well when we're doing CI/CD. Yeah, this is also the same. So you have to get used to it. First things first, you have to clone the repo. So yeah, I'm using a EPUB server for this task because Vagrant does not allow. You need a server that you can access from the internet. So that configuration I don't want to set up that whole configuration on Vagrant. So I got a public server. But for you can either choose to get a public server to do your tasks, or you can do it on your computer. You just install Docker on your. I'll send a link to install Docker on your personal computer or on your Ubuntu. No, for those that are using WXL, there's also a way you can install Docker as well. Yeah, install Docker on your system. So when you're testing it now, instead of using the IP address that I'm going to use on this tax, you use the what they call it. You use the public. You use the local host. So the application will be tied to your local host, basically. So yeah, this is it. I've cloned the repo. The repo is here on my server. Okay, you can see it, Dream Vacation app. It's here on my server, working perfectly. So you want to clone it. For those that don't know what clone is or cannot remember, I don't expect you not to know what clone is. But for those that will probably forget, clone is when you just come here, come to this code, copy this URL here, and then you paste it, basically. Paste it. No, paste it. Uh, yeah. So when you press enter, it clones the repo into your computer. That being said, my one has already been cloned, so I'll just CD into it. And then if I do ls, I'll see the front end and back end, like what I showed you there. So this is how in a typical DevOps environment, this is what you will see. This is what you will see that is what you'll be given. You get in a typical DevOps environment, this is what you'll be given. So your work now is to Dockerize and deploy. Containerize and what? Deploy. So that's basically your work now. You get. So let's do front end. First of all, you install Docker. That's the first thing you will do. You make sure that Docker is installed. So Docker, my own Docker is installed here. I don't want someone to come and ask me nonsense questions and say, oh, sorry for that. I assume that Docker, it will Dockerize automatically. I didn't ask, I don't know who asked me that question the last time. I beg, I beg, I beg. Take on the beg. So this is Docker. Docker is working. I'll send a list to download Docker across all environments so you get a proper understanding. Install Docker and ensure that it runs. Then to test it, you see Docker PS. Docker PS. This one, and there's no Docker PS to check the list of running containers. There's Docker image to check the list of images that are images. To check the list of images that are currently, they're all empty. Then there's Docker networks. Docker network. Docker network. Give me Docker network. Docker network X. Yeah. These ones are the local network that are already created. You can create your own. If you are doing multiple, deployment, you can create your own network. But these ones are the network that come with the whole Docker installation. So yeah, let's get right into it. So first thing first, we'll do CD front. We're learning as we're doing. So if you have any question, just call my attention. CD front end. We're in the front end now. You can see all the components of the front end. Now you do VI Docker file. You do VI Docker file. Okay, so yeah, VI Docker file. So we're creating what they call a Docker file. Now, from what I said in the last class, what we need to do is do a from. Since the front-end application is a JavaScript, it's a Node.js, it's a JavaScript related application. Node.js is a runtime. So React is the framework that was used to build the application. And React is also running on the Node.js runtime, Node runtime. So we're going to use Node. Now, there's a particular approach I want you to learn in building Dockerizing Node.js or JavaScript or front-end related application. It's called the multi-stage build. Now, when you build your application as as a whole, as a single unit, it's usually, the images are usually very heavy. You get. So for better optimization, you use what they call multi-stage build. When I write the Docker file finish, I'm going to show you what a Docker file is basically. So all right, so um do from Node.js from Node 18 dash alpine. Now using Alpine, or Alpine, using Alpine is also good because it's also like a lightweight version of Node.js, to make it's still also part of optimization strategies, to use Alpine. So Alpine, you can go and do research on Alpine. Alpine is like a node where we have Facebook Lite. You get Facebook Lite is Facebook Lite is like um Facebook, but there's some typical things that is making it a bit more lightweight. You get it's not that the application will not run um properly on Alpine. Just that in this scenario, is going to use more lesser, weight, lesser technologies, but to still get the job done. And it's good for situation. It's good for situation where um you are probably trying to dockerize a full like an application that is heavy, you get. It's good so that the weight of the application will not now make the image heavy, that kind of thing. So it's just to give the application a bit more, make it lighter a bit. So that's what Alpine does. Then we're now doing as build. So as build simply means we're setting this whole build. We're setting those next few steps now we're going to do. We're going to make them into what they call build. So build is like the variable that we'll set it as. So whatever we are doing in front is whatever we're doing in front now, set everything into what they call into a variable called build. So as build, then next we'll set environmental variables. Okay. Do a work. Work the oh, like I said before, create a work directory called app inside the container. Then we copy package star dot JSON. The next one will do run npm. So this is like npm install. Then copy npm. So next one, stage 2. So this first one is stage 1. I'll explain it when I'm done. So the multi-stage. We'll be implementing multi-stage views in the interview. Then copy from build. To expose the port maker, and then the command will be so yeah, this is the way you write a Docker file. Now let me explain. Like I said, we are putting this one as build, so we are saving this as build, work directory app. Then you copy package anything that has package start.json into this work directory, which is what is here. Then we Store npm, you run npm install, then copy build, then run npm build. So now npm build is what builds the application into a unique what they call it, a unique entity, you get, into what is deployable. Good. Now instead of just deploying the application like that, we'll now do what they call we'll now do what they call um multi-stage build. Now we'll package that application, then put it behind an Nginx configuration. Put it behind an Nginx, put it behind an Nginx setup. So this Nginx now will make it more optimized, make it's like setting it up to make the whole container better optimized instead of just carrying that heavy artifact that is generated in npm raw build and just pushing the now just deploying the container. This one makes it more streamlined, more easier to be deployed. You understand? So basically what that's basically what this whole setup does. This is the command. Now, after this one, I will expose. So since we're using Nginx by default is 80. Then command. This one is the command to run it inside Nginx. But you can still leave. You can still choose to just do npm run build and then stop. But this whole stage two is to make the build more, better optimized. That's just what it is. Now, if you go back, let's leave here. I've saved it down. I've saved this file. Now in this our directory now, we'll now do docker docker build dash dash t is tag. So if you want to tag or add a name, because one thing with docker, if you don't add a name, it's going to give you its own name. You get? If you don't add a name for yourself, it's going to give you its own name. So the best thing you will do now, is add it your own name. So let's just say the best thing to do for now for clarity, choose a name. First of all, the first part of the name should be the name of your docker hub, should be the name of your docker hub, because when you're pushing to docker hub, it's the name of your docker hub username first. You can name it anything, no optional, but this is production standard, like best practice. Then you now name it at the slide, you now make a forward slash and then name it whatever you, let me just say my KH or KC front end, CodeCamp front end. Then you now do dot. So dot is showing you that this Docker file is in this directory where we are in front end. That's what it is. Let's try it. Let's look at it. So if you do ls, you can see that there's Docker file here. So when we now do docker build dash t, this is my Docker hub, because we'll still push it to Docker hub dash t here at, let's see, we're tagging it as KC front end, then dot. So once we do this now, you press enter. Uh-oh. Error. Let's look at this thing again. Copy. Second. Hold on, let me find. Put this thing in the app store. Let me see my screen. I have to copy. I want to copy the code from my notepad. This Docker file, I wrote it and saved it. Let's do this.
Hello, boss.
Yeah, I can see you.
Hello.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, okay. I think from that copy command,
Yeah.
I think we supposed to have where we want to copy to and then where we are copy from. Like e.g.,
It's
if you
here
want to say
now.
copy dot dot.
No. Copy dot dot C. Copy build. This, we are copying from build, which is here. App slash. So
Okay.
inside this directory, they have created a build folder. So this is here. You're now moving into Nginx HTML here. So you're installing Nginx in the container. You
Okay.
get, and then
Okay.
you're moving the build that has been built to the Nginx here. You understand?
Okay.
So let's do this. Okay, that's finished. It was so fast because I've tested the code in the afternoon. So that's why it's so fast. Now you can see that it's going from one step. Step one, see, build 2 to 6, 3, copy package.json, build 4, copy mtn install, 5. It may waste time for your end, though, so don't be surprised because the reason why it was fast and showed cache. And you can see it showing cache, meaning that I've already built it before and deleted it, to test the whole code. I want to be writing code from scratch in class. So yeah. So if I now do Docker images, you can see that KC front end in 7 hours ago. 7 hours ago was when I wrote the code, but we tagged it. So this one is KC front end. Unit tests, kini size. Now, if you check now, there's no container running. There's no container running. So when we now want to now run a container using this image, what will we now do? We do docker run dash d dash d. Please note that dash d is what they call detached mode, because if you don't run it in detached mode, yeah, if you don't run your application in detached mode, it will just litter your entire, because it's a process. When you process running, you just keep on running on your terminal. So you have to run it in detached mode, meaning that you have to run it behind. Then dash p, this dash p is to set the port. Now let's set the port. To set a port, you do 80:80. Now what does this mean? 80:80 means you are mapping the port on your machine to the port on your container. So this 80 was what we exposed. This 80 was what we exposed on the container. This 80 was what we exposed on the container. That's where our application run. But this 80 in front is the port on our laptop or your on the server you are using. So we're opening up port 80 to access port 80. We're opening up port 80 on our computer to access port 80 on the container. So that's what it is. If you don't do this, your app can just be thrown into any port and then you have issues. Then the next one you now do my what's that thing? KC front end. I mean that's the name you saved it as. KC, so is it the almost a Messi slash K? So yeah, this is how you run it. Now when you run it now, you see this hash here. You see this hash here. If you now do docker ps again, you see that the container has been created from that image. The image is now KC frontend. Then again, it's created 8 seconds ago, which is what we just did now. I mean, the container has been up for 7 seconds ago. Port is this. So whatever you're looking, you can do localhost.at or kinikini dot your IP address of your server dot .at. That's why I didn't want to use something that has a public IP so that we'll be able to see it. Now, if you check this under this place, now you see name hopeful bands. Then it gives containers give name themselves whatever they want to name themselves. Their naming conventions are very, very strange. You get your naming convention. So you're giving this one hopeful band can throw you at anything. So now that we have done this, the next okay, let me show you the code on my computer. Let me share that screen. Okay, let me show you the boy. So my monitor is not good. I love doing this kind of thing with monitor. Now, I'm sure you can see my screen now. So now if you put the IP address, I've already reloaded. If you put the IP address, it's supposed to be port 80, but one thing you need to understand is that port 80 is an internet port. You get HTTP port, so you don't need to define it. You can just leave it. Port 80. Now you can see that this is the front end. This is how the front end is supposed to look. So everybody's front end is supposed to look like this. But the whole aim is that when you type the name of a country, it's supposed to give you details of that country, but it will not give you details of that country. Why? Because the backend is not connected. You get, and the database is not connected. So you need a backend and a database to connect and store the data. So if I put Nigeria, it's supposed to give me details about Nigeria and store it in the database. You get, so when my this thing I know that anytime I come to this URL, it's going to still always give me my list and I can delete, I can add. So it's basically like a to-do list that we did in Shell. You get, but this is a more fancy to-do list. You understand? So now, okay, let's do this. Then the next one I'm going to do. So we are creating Docker Compose. I'm sure you are aware of that. So creating a Docker Compose for this. Um, inside, it's not inside your front end. It's the main in the root directory of your application where you have your front end and back end. Now there's the front end. I've written the front end for you. There's still also the back end. So you do this one as your task yourself. You write the backend. You may not need to you may not need you may not need to write multi-stage build for this because backend is not user heavy. You get the reason why we did multi-stage for front end because that one, is where the users interact with the most. So it's only wise that you make it more optimized. But this one you can do the normal, just the normal way I did it for you in the video last class. Do that one normally, or you can Google how to Dockerize I think this is a Python application or something like that. This should be a Python application. Can't remember. But you can Google it, you can go through the code and then look at how to Dockerize a Python application and then to give you the breakthrough. Let me even check. This should be a Python application. Okay, it's a JavaScript application. The backend is JavaScript. Backend is Node.js. So yeah, the backend is Node.js, not Python. Just check from my other computer. So yeah, Google how to Dockerize a backend Node.js application and then Dockerize it. You don't need more to say. I'm giving you for Expo. Anyways, now for the Docker Compose. So when you're writing a Docker Compose, you need to have certain things in mind. First things first, you install Docker. So Docker Compose does not come with Docker. Docker Compose is a specific, but it uses Docker. But you have to install it separately on your computer or on your machine. You get. So you have to install that one separately as its own unique entity. You get. Now when you install it, you create a file again. But this one, ensure that you create the file in the root, not in any of the front end or back end. Create it in the root. But first of all, before we even talk of Docker Compose, let's talk of uploading images to uploading images to Docker Hub. So now that our container, is I've created the container, I want to push the image to Docker Hub. Probably want to reference it, sometime in the future, or want to push it for people to use. You log in. So you do Docker. Let me even go to Docker Hub first. Let's go to Docker Hub first. Docker Hub first. Hub. So we do Hub. So I've already logged in because like I said, I built this stuff in the afternoon. So I logged in. But you have to create an account. For those that don't have an account, you have to go and create an account on Docker Hub. Then when you create an account on Docker Hub, see. When you create an account on Docker Hub, so these are all the images I've put. You can see the pattern, my name and the name of the image. So when you log into Docker Hub, you go to this point here, which is your name. You go to account settings. Oh, not even account settings. You go to profile. Now, once you go to profile, it's loading. Once you go to profile, you see all the profiles and everything. Okay, I think it's even in this place. We just very confused. There's account information. So instead of my profile, you go to account settings here. Then you see personal access token. You see personal access token. You get so what they call personal access. You have to generate your own. When you generate a new token, you put the name, you can put KC token or my token, anyone. Once you generate a new token, you do public access, read, write, and delete, or read and write. So it's trying to tell you that your machine that your Docker is installed can read and write to this repo, to this Docker hub. If you put read and write and delete, it means that you can read, write, and delete stuff from this Docker hub. But it depends on the system. Once you click generate, I'm not going to click it now because I already have a token. But once you click generate, it will show you some hashed numbers. Please copy those numbers into your notepad. Please copy those numbers into a notepad. You get? Once you copy anything, because if you leave this screen or you refresh this screen, my brother, you won't see that that token again. So you generate and copy it into a notepad. So when you copy it into a notepad, let me just do it basically. What's there to do? Once you generate it, to tell you this is this thing. Once you copy this thing out. So now you now do docker login dash u. This dash u now is your username. This dash u now is your username. The next one is your password. So if I come here now and do, let me copy that command. I copy this and I come here and do docker login and I paste. Ask me for what password. You see, a personal access token can be used. That's what it's telling you. Now you now copy this or copy from where you pasted it from. You can just copy. It's not going to appear. Oh, so don't copy it 2 times. You paste. Once you paste, you press enter. So you login succeeded. If you leave here, if you leave here, you refresh, that disappeared though. It's not going to appear again. You will never see this token again. Never. So yeah, now that you see, now you now do docker push. So once you do docker push, you now put the name of this thing, the slash KC. The same way you studied slash KC what? KC front end. I feel like part of the tag self you have to push. I think please when you dockerize, push. I want to see a screenshot of your Docker hub. So push your image and send a screenshot before going to Docker Compose. So I'm doing it for only front end. Do for back end. You don't need database because you're pulling out Postgres. You're using Postgres. So Postgres is already an image itself. Postgres is already an image itself. So you don't need to push anything. You're using Postgres image, like I taught in the last class. That's what you're going to do. So when I do this, you're going to see it's going to give you some list of mounted kini. Now it has pushed. Once it comes back to your terminal, you know it has pushed successfully. So if I go back to home, if I go back to home and then go to repositories, I think. One thing with DevOps, most of all these tools I teach, I don't use them. I don't use them frequently. See it now. You can see KC front end. Sure, people are seeing KC front end less than a minute ago. I intentionally did not want to push that. I'll show you. There's not be as if I'm pushing stuff without telling you. Less than a minute ago. So this is where your image is. You can open it and view. So this screen now that you're seeing like this, screenshot it and put in your assignments for front end. Do the same for front end and back end. But for database, you're pulling Postgres. So let me show you Postgres. Let me show you Postgres. Postgres. So this is what you're going to use for your setup. Look at Postgres here. Use the official image. You don't go and use all these cherry that here. They are all clones. See this one, 1 billion views, 1 billion pulls, star, 14,000 stars, last updated 14. Use the official image, Docker official image. Use this one. This is what you are pulling to make your database container. So the next thing we're going to do, this class is very introductory. It's very simple. I'm not going to waste time. Next thing we're going to do is Docker Compose. When you do vi docker compose.yml, so you're creating a Docker Compose file. So um you install Docker Compose. Unfortunately, I didn't install Docker Compose on this machine, but I'll just show you how it's done. So the first thing you will do here is service. You do services because, like I said, you are working on different services: front end, back end, and what? Front end, back end, and DB. So the front end, push, ensure that it follows the, ensure that it follows the this thing. You see front end rather. Okay, services front end. So front end, come here. This version I want to add is now compulsory for most people add 3.8. Front end build.
So the version, how will you know the version?
The version is the version but this is the version, the most stable version now 3.8. But there should be 3.9. There should be 3.9. But like I said, it's not compulsory because if you don't put version, they automatically choose the latest version for you. You understand? It's not compulsory. I'm not doing it so you will see that there's something called version there. Now you will see build. This build now you now do dot slash front end. Okay. Now front end now you're going to reference the front end folder that we just came from. Do the same thing for back end. Do you understand? Do the same thing for back end. Now, the next one we're going to do that there's no indent. This one I'm going to do now is port. So instead of defining ports in that command, you can do it here. You can do it here. So we'll do ports 3000, no, not 3000, 8080, right? 80. They tell you that the machine is still. Now, the next thing you're going to do is environment. Now, before we go into environment, let me save this and quit. Let's end of our application. Please, this is also a very important setup we're going to do. Okay, you're not going to see .env here, but if you're using like a terminal or VS Code, you will see .env. You get in that.env shows the environmental variables. Let's do cd.env or rather cat.env. Not going to show here because it's this thing. Now, if you can look well, let me just open it so you see vi.env. If you look well, that there's only one environmental variable here, which is this. Please note that the environmental variables must be specified in the Docker Compose file. So this is it. The reason why we didn't specify even when we're doing that whole manual process was because we're only the Dockerizing one by one. So that Docker build that we did has already built it with the environmental variable. You get. Well, since we're orchestrating different containers together to make for the deployment, we have to specify it. So now you can see this is React App API URL. This. So let's go back. Let's go back to Docker Compose. When we go back to Docker Compose, we'll now do environments. Environments. Environment is this. So you do React, let's go app, let's go API, let's go URL, which is what you showed you there. Then HTTP. So this is the exact way you see it on the application. Now the reason why we're doing this because this React App API URL, we're doing this because this is the URL that is for the back end. So when we deploy the back end, we're deploying the back end on port 3001. You understand? By deploying the backend on port 3001, we're not even supposed to do this thing here. By deploying the backend on port 3001. So this connection now is what is connecting the back end to the front end. You get. So when you say localhost 3000, I'm going to look for where 3001 is, which is the back end. So you now do the next one you will do now is depends on backend. So now you are doing the name of your service, the next service you're going to build now is backend. So now when you build backend now, backend will be deployed on port 3001 because that's what is specified in the code. Even on your Docker file, ensure that you open port 3001. Then you now depend the backend on the database. Now let me show you something. See in the backend, when you go into the backend now, you also see .env. See the URLs for backend. See the environmental variable for backend. You also have to reference this. You also need to reference this in your setup. You understand? But this particular now, let me give you expo. This database URL, you have to change it to the name that you're going to specify on your DB service in your Docker Compose. You have to change it. So your DB name will not be localhost, your DB port. This is your DB port. Then you have to do the name of the database. You have to ensure that it's dynamic enough to match what you're going to put in the DB service. So when the application runs, it's going to look for the right credentials and log into the database. So yeah, basically. So I've done for only front end for you. I've given you expo. That was the aim for the class. I needed to give expo to better understand the whole setup. So now, so for those of you that want to build, you have to build it from here. So the next thing you are going to do now is to next thing you're going to do now is to do back end. Build. I'm not going to show you part like this. Build this dash back end. So it's going to build. Now, if you want to reference probably that your build and push, you already build and push, and you want to reference it in the Docker Compose instead of the folder, you just do image or images. Image, yeah. You do the KC front end. You know, we have already pushed KC front end already. So pull, it will automatically find the Docker hub and pull the KC image. But since we are doing it we're building everything from scratch, you do build front end. The next thing you do is back end. The next thing you do is set your environmental variables, set the depends on, and set the port. Do the same thing for DB. Do the same thing for DB. Now, this is where you now do for DB. You can now do image. For DB, you now do image because why? We're not building it from scratch. You understand? For DB, we're not building it from scratch. So you now do image. You now do Postgres, which is that Postgres. You now go to Docker Hub and pick. You can choose a particular version. You can say Postgres 12 or Postgres 13 or anyone. Or let's just say 13 here. Then you do the rest. You know, the environmental variables, the ports, the volumes, everything. You do the rest. Don't forget that this one will have depends on the they're going to put the name here. See the name here, DB. It's going to depend on the that means DB will when you put this one Docker Compose up, DB will be built first. When you do the Docker Compose up, DB will be built first, followed by back end, followed by front end. Because front end depends on back end depends on DB. So DB will build first. Or anytime you want to initiate this command, DB will build first. So when you're done, you now do Docker compose up -d to now run in detached mode. You understand? To run it in detached mode, in dash D to run in detached mode. It's not going to run here because I have not installed Docker Compose. But run -d in detached mode, then it will now run. So when you run, you now still go to this IP address. You still go to this IP address and then you put in. Once you put it in, the country is supposed to show under. Send screenshot, the country is supposed to show under because all the back end, front end, and this one only front end is up. You get, so it's not going to, no matter what you press, it's not even going to show you an error because there's no error handling. It's just for this thing. So yeah, basically. So does anyone have any question they would like to ask? Because this is the task I basically gave. So the way people don't ask questions, they, I find it scary.
Okay. Can you hear me, sir?
I hear you.
Okay, sir. When you were running for when you were doing for the front end, then where this you had port and then you did 80 on
80
80.
colon 80
So what-
colon 80.
Yes,
But if you're
80
running,
colon 80.
yeah. So if you're
So
running
I
an
wanted to
application,
ask,
uh, is there what?
is that 80 the
No,
standard
it's not.
port for running?
It's not. You can choose anything.
Okay.
But 80 is HTTP port. You get. So when I was doing learning, we talk about HTTP port. HTTP is what allows your is like the default port that allows internet or allows public access into an application. 80 is a default port. If you choose any port outside 80, you have to manually put it on your URL. That's why you can do www.xy because that application that is running on xyz.com is running on port 8 automatically. That's the reason why we put it under Nginx because Nginx is also rendered under port 80 by default. That's the setup. Nginx is running under port 80 by default. So when your application is running through Nginx, your application automatically runs on port 80 by default. But if you don't want to use if you don't want to use Nginx now, you want to deploy it like that. If your application, let me say your application is running on port 3000, you have to specify the port 3000 on your URL. That's why you don't see www.xyz.com colon 3000 on your URL. You get, it doesn't look, it doesn't, it's not good because it's like a security flaw. You just see, oh, a port is showing. You get.
Okay.
So what best practice? I'm teaching you best practice. Put your application under a web server like Nginx. You get, Nginx acts like a web server to encapsulate your application and render it under itself. You get, so Nginx automatically runs on port 80. That's the default. That's the setting. No, it's not changed. So when you're exposing port 80, you're exposing Nginx as a web server that is running your application inside the server, or rather inside the container. Rather, do you understand?
Yes,
So
sir.
that's why you
I
can see. That's
understand.
why when I opened, if I run, if I'm saying now I run this app, let me say now I run this app now port 3000. I'll have to do port 3000 before this app will open, which does not make sense. If I put this IP address into a domain name now, I'll now have to be doing colon 3000. You get, but see,
Mm.
running under engine, but 80 is the public, so it's a port that allows internet. You get, so when you something running on port 80, you don't need to specify it manual. You don't need to specify. That's why you can see when I run that if I put this data inside a domain name now, if I put that domain name, this application will come out automatically. So yeah, that's why I told you run your front end. You don't need to run the back end because the back end is not being accessed by the internet. You get, your back end is being accessed by your application, your front end. It's your front end that's being accessed by the internet. So that's why we use a web server to encapsulate it. Did you understand?
Yes, sir. So, sir, after running the front end, it will automatically generate the IP address which you use to log in
No,
now.
no, 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 no. This
That is
IP address is my server IP address. If you're using your laptop, if you're using your laptop for the project, you use localhost. So your localhost is your local on your laptop. Localhost is automatically like localhost is automatically mapped to your laptop's IP address. This IP address is the server that I'm using to run this project. I'm not using my laptop. I'm using a server that I rented. I bought. You get, so this is the IP address. This is why I'm not using Vagrant because Vagrant does not have a public IP, and I don't know
okay.
how to set up public IP on Vagrant. So that's why I'm using a public server. But if you're using I would suggest you use your laptop. Install Docker on your laptop. Run the setup on your laptop. It's going to like make your laptop sound up a bit, but it's for temporary purposes. Or if you can get a server on DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean servers come with IP address. You get. So when you run the IP address, this IP address now is what will map to a domain name to build this application fully. It's the IP address that will map to a domain name that you now see www.dreamvacationdestinations.com. You get.
Okay, sir.
Any more questions?
Um, Good evening. So please, can you go to the Docker Compose file?
Okay.
Okay.
Hope you know that backend and DB is not complete though. You're the one that will
Yes,
complete it
yes,
yourself. Okay.
yes. I want to ask about this environment here. I want to understand. It's when you are running it in the local server, you use
Localhost.
localhost.
So localhost is what they call localhost. Basically the English that is there. Localhost is the host on your laptop. So your laptop's IP address is referred to as localhost. Do you
Okay.
understand? Or the IP address of the server you're running. If you're running this, so for example, now, if I'm running an operation inside my server and I want to refer to the IP address of the server inside my server, I don't need to start writing this IP address here on my server. I can still do this, so I can still copy this. I can still copy this and paste here if I wanted to, and paste here if I wanted to. Do you understand?
Yes. Well, my question is, so assuming I've hosted my app in, let's say, GoDaddy, can I just use um let's say myapp.com
Yes,
and
you
use it
can.
as my
Yes, you can.
so
Can you hear me?
when that happens, what yes I can hear you. So when that happens, what's
Can you hear
actually
me?
happening? I can hear you, sir. Can you hear me?
Hello?
I can hear you, sir. Hello, I can hear you, sir. Hello, I can hear you, sir.
I think his network. His network uh, is out. Let's just wait for him to rejoin.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yes,
can
I can hear
hear you,
you.
sir.
Can you
I can
hear me,
hear.
sir?
Yeah, I can hear
Okay.
you. So,
So okay, so I want to understand what's actually happening, right?
mm,
When you what's the Docker Compose all about, and what if someone decides not to use Docker Compose?
if you decide not to use
I
Docker
want to
Compose, it's
understand
fine.
like what's the real function of Docker Compose.
Docker Compose is what they call putting microservice. So each part of your application you are running, we are deploying it as a service. So now you have built the front end, you have built the back end. You can decide to put the front end on its own server and put the back end on its own server, and then use another server for database. Fine. But this one that we are putting it in a container and running each of the components as a service, so that they can be, in as much as they are together, they can still run individually, but under the same entity, which is our server. You understand? So we're running the front end as its own service, running the back end as its own service, running the database as its own service, each connected to each other. You understand? So this front end now has to reference this back end for it to work. So this environment is what is referencing this, what is referencing this back end. You get? Because when you deploy this, your server, this server now is localhost. The IP address of this server is stored under localhost. Localhost is basically localhost, the IP address of the server you are. Well, so since everything is inside the server, no need to reference the IP address again here. Just put localhost, because localhost will pick. You know, when you deploy this backend, like I said, since it depends on backend, when you deploy the backend will run on port 3001 in this same server. You understand? What React will now, what this front end will now do is to get this, it is to get the back end. Get the back end and use to run the front end, because the front end will have to pull data from the back end. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Good.
So my question now is, right, if I'm using the environment, let's say I hosted it in another hosting service, right? Actually, I want to ask, is Docker like a hosting service whereby you host your app and then you'll be able to accept that app, or is it just to I don't
Were you
really
in the Tuesday
understand.
class?
Yeah, I am, but I really don't
But
understand the.
he didn't ask questions on Tuesday. Docker is not a hosting service. Docker is a containerization service. You are putting applications inside a container to run inside a container. You understand? You're putting all your applications inside a container, and these applications now, so Docker is the umbrella. And Docker is like a ship, for example. Let me use a ship. Docker is like a ship. Your container now, your server now is your, okay. Docker is like a ship. Then each of these components, each of these services now are like containers. Inside that ship. You get? Now, each of these containers, they communicate to each other using what they call a Docker network. That one is the engineering behind Docker. It's not our concern with that. So, for example, now you have a ship, you want to move software from one point to another. You want to move goods from one point to another, you have a ship. This ship now has 3 containers: front end, back end, database. You understand? The database container is there. The back end needs to communicate with the database. They use what they call environmental variables. But since it's still under the same ship, the IP address is the same. Just reference it. Which is where we reference it here, depend on back end. So depending on this container for this one to work. I don't know if you understand the concept I'm painting in your head, basically.
Yes, I do.
Good. So it is running. That's how software is run now. All softwares are, you don't just put a software on a server and run. Because when that software wants to scale or wants heavy traffic hit it, it goes down. That's why people put softwares inside a container and deploy them as services. That's the ops in DevOps. Do you understand?
Yes, I do. So
Good.
it's basically just a way to help developers to
Deploy
containerize
their
their apps.
Exactly. Push their
and
deploy
then
their
deploy,
apps.
so that whenever they want to access it, they can easily go to that container and download it and start.
They don't even need to download it. Whenever they want to update, they can just update the container. You get.
Okay.
And the old code is not destroyed, instead is modified. Do you
All right.
understand?
All right. I do.
Whew, Umo, Jose Maria, you don't make my throat dry.
Sorry, sir.
No wahala, don't mind me. Any more questions? Hello,
Yes, good evening.
Wilfred. Good evening.
Good evening. My question is from the tax.
Okay.
So should we use, apart from using the Docker compose file to build the front end and the back end, should we also build the front end and the back end differently?
No. So what you are going to do, I think that's a very, very smart question. I like that. What you're going to do is you will build the front end and build the back end manually and
Okay.
screenshots. You understand?
Okay,
And
yeah.
screenshots for Docker. When you put on Docker Hub, you screenshot. Now you're now using Docker Compose. So in this setup, it will most likely not build front end and back end again because it's already been built. Or it will build it again because the name has probably changed this time because you're now using front end and back end. You get. But
Yes.
just to show that, okay, you're putting all of them together, because that other one I thought initially is just one by one by one. You're just doing one by one. So there's no interconnection between them. This one proves an interconnection. You have to also do what they call Docker network, but Docker network in this case is what connects the three of them. So the three of them to also be on the same network. You define a network under, just do your research. You define a network under, it's not hard. You don't add that same network to the three services. So it will be one network for the three of them. That's what to connect the three of them. If you had that other setup, there was no network. So you're deploying front end as a separate container, deploying back. You now
Yes.
have to now start deploying network as a separate container. That kind of thing. So this one you will define the same way we did this. Under here, where you see where the mouse is, you define the Docker network. It can be my network, or it can be KC network. Then you now add each network to this point, or you may not even define a network because you may not even need to define a network. The network automatically, Docker Compose automatically uses its own network. But sometimes, me personally, I'm stubborn. I used to define my own network. But even if you don't define a network, Docker Compose will use its network since you are doing multiple containers to generate a network for you. For me, I used to
Okay.
define it based on name. So if I'm having a particular naming convention, because Docker Compose doesn't name my network anything, I will specifically define my own network. But if I like this way I'm doing now, if I deploy it, you will see itself creating network first. When you do Docker Compose, or the first thing you will see is creating network. To create that network first, before now start doing each point, one by one by one. It will deploy DB first. You can choose not to use -d, so you see how the process is going. That -d
Okay.
is to run it in the background. You get.
Yes.
You can choose not to do -d, so you see. So when you do Docker Compose up, you will see creating network. Then you now see DB, because why? This DB is the first. So it will define to pull down this Docker image, run it, go to back end, pull it, build it, run it, go to front end, build it, run it. So everything will depend on the configurations that you set. You understand? But those first two that we did is just for screenshots. It will not be a major determinant on your app running. Do you
Okay.
understand?
Yes, I
Like
understand.
that question is very, very sharp. You're very well observant. Thank you.
Welcome.
So that first one is just to show you how to build manually and push. You get, or you can even choose. You can even be smart and smart, and then even if you don't want to do build, you can build front end, build back end, push, then use image to pull them here in these two parts. You understand? You can also do that approach as well if you want. Do you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So yeah, that's just the no knowledge is a waste. Please,
Thank you.
the action points this night is to create a Docker Hub account. That's the action point for the night. Create a Docker Hub account. Then you pull it. And then once you push it, once you push the repo screenshot, that's part of your screenshot, your deliverable, screenshot it, and then ensure that the application works. When the application works, test it, write a country there, and then see that you generate output. Now, once you generate output, crash your DB server, probably stop your DB server and run it again. Or rather, do Docker Compose down. So Docker Compose down is to bring down all the services. Do Docker Compose down and do Docker Compose up again. You get, go back to that show that you did Docker Compose down, then do Docker Compose up again. Now go back to that application and ensure that those to-dos are still there. That's the most important part. Because if you don't define a volume, I put it there, if you don't define a volume, when your containers go down and come up again, all your data will be missing. And you don't want to do that in production, where probably something happened like this, and your containers drifted and then went off and went on. Millions of data goes off. So ensure put a Docker volume that will preserve the data. The Docker volume will be stored on your local machine, use your laptop or your server. So any data that is being stored there, it is replicated on that volume. So if you do Docker Compose down and come back up again, once you come back up again, go back to that IP address and ensure that your data, the things that you're already written, all the countries that you're referenced are still there. Then you have passed, basically. Any more questions? Any more questions? There is this guy, is he not here? Let me stop. Let me stop recording. Oh boys, who is, please? I think the time that I went, Jose Maria, can you go off and come back so that the host this thing will come back to me, please?